Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the most famous tales of ancient Greece, one that's been told and retold for centuries, the story of the Trojan Horse. Picture this, a massive wooden horse, hollowed out and filled with soldiers, standing proudly outside the gates of the ancient city of Troy. It's one of those stories that's so ingrained in history and pop culture, we often forget there might be more to it than just the dramatic Hollywood version. In truth, the real story behind the Trojan Horse might not keep you up at night, it's far less thrilling than we've been led to believe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, feel free to post where you're tuning in from and what time it is there, I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The myth of the Trojan horse is part of the grand narrative of the Trojan War, a story brimming with heroism, tragedy, and yes, a lot of wooden horses. But behind the famous imagery lies a much more complicated tale, one that's influenced generations and made its mark not just in literature but in the way we think about trickery and war. It's one of those stories that's easy to get lost in, filled with drama and suspense. But what if I told you the truth about the Trojan horse isn't as exciting as it seems? There's a lot more to the story than the Greeks just tricking the Trojans with a big wooden horse. Let's peel back the layers and take a look at the myth's origins, how it became so ingrained in our minds, and how it might have actually unfolded. But don't worry, this isn't going to be a history lecture, you'll likely be dozing off in no time. Before we get into the Trojan horse itself, let's take a step back and talk about the war that set the stage for it. The Trojan War, one of the most famous conflicts in ancient mythology, was fought between the city of Troy and a coalition of Greek forces. But what exactly caused this legendary war? Historians and mythologists still debate the true origins of the conflict, but the most popular story involves a woman named Helen. Helen was known as the most beautiful woman in the world, and her beauty became the spark for the fire that would burn Troy to the ground. According to the myth, Helen was married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta. But she was abducted, or some say eloped, by Paris, a prince of Troy. This act of taking a king's wife wasn't just a personal insult, it was a direct blow to Greek honor. Menelaus, enraged, called upon all the other Greek kings and heroes to help him reclaim his wife, swearing an oath that would unite them in war against Troy. This coalition of Greek forces, led by Agamemnon, Menelaus's brother, set sail to Troy, and thus began the Trojan War. The Greeks, with their combined armies, laid siege to the city of Troy, which was protected by strong walls. For years, the two sides fought without a clear victor, with neither being able to break through the defenses of the other. It was a drawn-out conflict, full of legendary heroes like Achilles, Hector, and Odysseus. Historians still argue whether the Trojan War was based on real events or whether it was entirely a product of myth. Some believe that the war was a historical event that was later exaggerated, while others suggest that it's a pure mythological tale designed to explain the origins of certain cultural beliefs. Either way, the war became the backdrop for many famous stories and provided the setting for the most well-known part of the myth, the Trojan horse. But while the war itself raged on, it wasn't just the mighty battles that would define the conflict, it was also the strategies and cunning that came into play. And that's where the Trojan horse comes in, a symbol of how a clever idea could turn the tide of war. So, as the Greeks were growing desperate to end the stalemate, they turned to their final, most famous trick. Now that we've set the stage with the war itself, let's focus on how the Trojan horse came to be. If you've ever heard the phrase, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts," you know it's tied to this legendary trick. The horse, while it may seem like an odd idea for an ancient military strategy, was a stroke of genius, or, depending on how you look at it, a perfect example of how cleverness can win wars when brute force doesn't. The story goes that after a long, fruitless siege that lasted 10 years, the Greeks needed a way to breach the walls of Troy. They couldn't storm the city by force, and their morale was waning. So, as the tale goes, they decided to build a colossal wooden horse, an offering meant to symbolize their departure from the war. But this wasn't just any horse. Inside, the Greeks concealed a group of their best soldiers, ready to strike once the Trojans had accepted the horse into their city. The plan was to present the horse as a gift to the Trojans, as a symbol of their surrender and a token of peace. The Greeks, in theory, would sail away in retreat, leaving the Trojans to think they had won. But here's the thing, while the horse itself is often depicted as a great, imposing structure, the Greeks weren't just relying on its size. They were counting on the Trojans' trust. After 10 years of siege, the Trojans were desperate for any sign of hope. The Greeks knew this. So, they created a ruse so convincing that the Trojans fell for it hook, line, and sinker. This gift was brought inside the city walls and set up as a symbol of victory. But little did the Trojans know, their real downfall had just arrived in the form of a wooden horse. Historians still debate how realistic this idea actually was. Some argue that it's possible the Greeks might have constructed a large wooden horse and concealed soldiers inside, while others believe it could have been a symbolic gesture or even an afterthought that was later elaborated into the myth we know today. After all, no archaeological evidence has ever definitively confirmed the existence of the horse, making it more of a legendary device in Greek myth rather than a proven historical fact. However, even if the horse itself was a later addition to the story, the myth perfectly embodies Greek cleverness, a cultural trait that was celebrated in their myths. The idea of outwitting your enemy, of using wit and strategy to overcome brute force, was deeply ingrained in the Greek way of thinking. As we delve deeper into the story of the Trojan horse, let's consider the real reason behind its construction. While the myth suggests that the horse was a symbol of Greek surrender, there's more to it than meets the eye. The Trojan horse was far from just a gift meant to mark the Greeks' retreat, it was a masterstroke of psychological warfare, a strategic gamble that capitalized on the Trojans' desperation and their misjudgment of the Greeks' intentions. In truth, the Greeks had no intention of leaving Troy. Their goal was to end the seemingly endless siege by infiltrating the city under the guise of peace. The horse's purpose wasn't merely symbolic, it was a Trojan trick designed to get inside the city walls. The Greeks' military leaders, including the cunning Odysseus, who is often hailed as the mastermind behind the strategy, understood the psychological dynamics at play. After years of relentless warfare, the Trojans were tired, suspicious of every move, and desperate for peace. They believed the Greeks were finally abandoning the fight, so the Greeks played into this idea, presenting the horse as a final, symbolic offering of goodwill. The horse was built on such a massive scale that it would have been hard to ignore. But it wasn't just for show. The Greeks filled it with soldiers, camouflaged within the hollow structure, ready to launch a surprise attack once the Trojans brought it inside the gates. They knew the Trojans would feel compelled to accept the gift and celebrate their supposed victory, lowering their guard just when the Greeks needed them to. What better way to ensure the Trojans would trust them than by offering a token of surrender? The Greeks exploited their enemies' exhaustion and hope for an end to the war. Historians still argue about how much of the Trojan horse myth is rooted in fact. Could the Greeks really have used such a large wooden horse to hide soldiers? And if so, how plausible was it that the Trojans were naive enough to fall for the ruse? Some scholars believe that the horse was purely symbolic, a tale invented by the Greeks to explain their eventual victory. Others maintain that it's entirely possible that the Greeks used a large wooden structure to conceal soldiers, using psychological tactics to infiltrate the city. What's clear is that the Trojan horse served as the perfect metaphor for the Greek worldview, a combination of strategy, cunning, and exploiting human weakness. The Greeks knew their victory would not come solely through physical force but through understanding their enemy's psychology and exploiting it to their advantage. In this way, the horse was more than a symbol of war, it was a weapon in itself, crafted with precision, patience, and intelligence. As we move forward in understanding the story of the Trojan horse, let's look at the literary sources that helped shape this myth into what we know today. The Trojan horse wasn't just a part of the oral tradition, it was immortalized by some of the greatest works of ancient literature. It's important to note that the myth of the Trojan horse didn't originate from one singular source. Instead, it became part of a larger narrative that evolved over time, shaped by different authors and poets, each adding their own flavor to the tale. The most well-known literary source for the Trojan horse is Virgil's Aeneid, written in the 1st century BCE. Virgil, a Roman poet, chronicled the story of Aeneas, a Trojan hero who escapes the fall of Troy and eventually goes on to found Rome. While Virgil didn't write a historical account, his epic poem drew heavily from earlier Greek traditions, and in his version of the Trojan horse, the Greeks built the massive horse as a gift for the Trojans to celebrate their victory. Once inside the walls of Troy, the soldiers hidden in the horse would leap out, opening the gates for the Greek army to infiltrate the city. But Virgil wasn't the first to mention the Trojan horse. In fact, it's also referenced in Homer's Odyssey, where Odysseus recounts the events surrounding the fall of Troy, including the Greeks' cunning use of the horse. However, in Homer's version, the horse is not quite the central figure it becomes in later works. Homer's focus was on the heroes and the gods, while the horse itself plays a more secondary role in the grand narrative of the Trojan War. The Iliad, Homer's other famous epic, focuses mostly on the years of battle leading up to the war's end, giving only a brief glimpse of the horse. The horse itself is seen more as a trick, a final blow to the Trojans' hopes, rather than a symbol of victory. Still, these early mentions in Homer's works were crucial in laying the groundwork for the more detailed accounts that would come later. Historians still argue over how much of these literary sources reflect historical truth. Did the ancient Greeks and Romans truly believe in the story of the Trojan horse, or was it just a mythological tale invented to explain the fall of Troy? Some scholars believe that the horse was a literary device, a symbol of the deceptive tactics the Greeks used to bring down their enemy. Others suggest that the myth was based on real military strategies, with the Greeks using a clever trick to break the stalemate. Either way, the myth became an essential part of the narrative surrounding the Trojan War. As time went on, other authors and poets added their own interpretations to the Trojan horse story. For example, in the Cypria, an epic poem attributed to the Greek poet Stesichorus, the horse is mentioned as part of the broader tale of the war, showing how the myth was integrated into the larger narrative. Even in the later years of Roman rule, the myth continued to resonate. Writers like Ovid and Lucan would further shape the story, keeping the Trojan horse alive in the collective imagination. The combination of these literary sources turned the Trojan horse from a simple military tactic into a lasting symbol of the cunning and deception that characterized the Greeks' victory. The story went from a minor detail to one of the most iconic and enduring images in Western mythology. Now that we've explored the literary sources behind the Trojan horse, let's take a moment to consider what the horse itself symbolizes. It's easy to think of the horse as just a clever military trick, but there's much more to it than that. In many ways, the Trojan horse serves as a metaphor for human nature, deception, and the destructive power of overconfidence. Over the centuries, the horse has come to symbolize the hidden dangers that lurk beneath the surface and the consequences of letting one's guard down. First and foremost, the Trojan horse represents cunning and strategy. The Greeks, unable to defeat the Trojans with brute force after a decade of fighting, resorted to the one weapon they had left, their intellect. They knew that the Trojans, worn down and weary from years of siege, were vulnerable to deception. The horse, a gift of peace, appeared to be a symbol of surrender. The very idea of it being a gift, a gesture of goodwill, was enough to lull the Trojans into a false sense of security. In the end, this sense of security was their undoing. Historians still argue about what the Trojan horse ultimately represents. Some suggest it's a symbol of the dangers of hubris, the Greek word for excessive pride. The Trojans were so confident in their victory that they allowed the Greeks to trick them with a gift. They had already endured a long siege and believed that the war was over. Their confidence in their triumph made them blind to the possibility that the Greeks might still have a trick up their sleeve. So, in a sense, the Trojan horse becomes a symbol of how pride and overconfidence can lead to one's downfall. The horse also serves as a metaphor for the power of appearances. The Trojans saw the horse as a symbol of Greek defeat and peace, something harmless that could be brought into the city. But appearances were deceiving. What looked like a beautiful gift was, in fact, a Trojan trick designed to bring about their downfall. This theme of appearances versus reality is common in Greek mythology and serves as a timeless reminder that things are often not what they seem. Beyond these moral lessons, the Trojan horse also symbolizes the brutal nature of war. It wasn't just a simple trick, it was a calculated and ruthless tactic that showed how far the Greeks were willing to go to win. The horse, filled with soldiers, was the last and most devastating weapon in their arsenal. The seemingly innocent wooden structure became the vehicle for destruction, a stark reminder of how conflict can turn even the most innocent of things into instruments of death and devastation. As the myth of the Trojan horse spread throughout the ancient world, its symbolism evolved. It became a symbol of deception, of the dangers of letting down one's guard, and of the catastrophic consequences that can arise from underestimating your enemy. The horse became more than just a clever trick, it became a cautionary tale, a story that has endured for millennia to teach us the dangers of pride, overconfidence, and the false allure of peaceful appearances. Now, let's turn our attention to the role of the gods in the Trojan horse myth. As with many other myths from ancient Greece, divine intervention plays a critical part in shaping the story, and the Trojan horse is no exception. The gods weren't merely passive observers in this tale, they were actively involved in both the creation and the ultimate success of the Greeks' plan. However, the involvement of the gods is far from simple, it adds layers of complexity, moral ambiguity, and divine politics to the story. First and foremost, we must look at the Greek gods, whose involvement in the Trojan War was a key element of the conflict. The war itself, as we know, was instigated by the gods, specifically, the quarrel between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite over the golden apple. This divine conflict, sparked by Paris's judgment, set the stage for a war that would drag on for 10 years. But the gods didn't just set the wheels of war in motion, they also had a hand in its outcome. When it comes to the Trojan horse, one of the most important deities to consider is Athena, the goddess of wisdom, war strategy, and cunning. Athena played a crucial role in guiding the Greeks to victory, and she was the one who inspired the idea of the Trojan horse. In some versions of the myth, it said that Athena not only aided the Greeks in the construction of the horse but also ensured that the Trojans would fall for the ruse. The Greeks' success in the war was due, in no small part, to the wisdom and cunning of Athena. The goddess's influence in this strategy reflects her domain over both war and intellect. But Athena wasn't the only deity involved. The gods were divided in their support, with some backing the Greeks and others supporting the Trojans. For example, Poseidon, the god of the sea, played a more neutral role in the war but was also involved in the Greeks' eventual victory. On the Trojan side, the gods were similarly divided. Apollo, Artemis, and Aphrodite were all staunchly supportive of Troy, fighting fiercely for the Trojans. However, despite the gods' support for both sides, it was Athena's guidance that ultimately led the Greeks to triumph with the Trojan horse. Historians still debate the role of the gods in the Trojan horse myth. Were they simply embodiments of the forces of fate, acting out their roles in a cosmic drama, or did they actively intervene in human affairs to tip the balance in favor of one side or the other? Some scholars argue that the gods' involvement in the myth is a reflection of the Greeks' belief in divine intervention in the lives of mortals. Others suggest that the gods were used to justify the actions of the Greeks and Trojans, providing a moral framework for what might otherwise be seen as a ruthless act of war. Whatever the case, the gods' influence in the Trojan horse myth cannot be overlooked. The horse itself, as a symbol of cunning and strategy, reflects the divine gift of wisdom, particularly from Athena. It's as if the gods themselves were setting the stage for the final, decisive blow in the war, guiding the Greeks to victory through their divine intervention. The gods in this myth represent not only power but also the unpredictable nature of fate. After all, who could have predicted that such a seemingly harmless gift would lead to the downfall of Troy? The involvement of the gods adds an additional layer to the Trojan horse myth. It wasn't just a human victory, but one shaped by divine will. The Greeks may have been clever, but it was the gods who ensured that their cleverness would succeed. This divine meddling, often present in Greek myths, reminds us that fate and the will of the gods were central to the lives of the ancient Greeks. In the case of the Trojan horse, the gods were the ultimate orchestrators of the outcome, showing that even the greatest human strategies are ultimately shaped by the whims of the divine. Now that we've covered the divine backing behind the Trojan horse, let's shift our focus to the moment when the Greeks actually delivered the horse to the Trojans, an act that would become one of the most iconic scenes in the myth. Picture it, the Greeks, having seemingly abandoned their siege and sailed away, leave behind what they claim is a symbol of their peace, a gigantic wooden horse, standing ominously at the gates of Troy. But here's the twist, this gift is not a gesture of goodwill, it's the harbinger of the city's destruction. The arrival of the horse was a turning point in the story. For 10 years, the Trojans had fought the Greeks to a standstill. They'd witnessed countless battles, endured sieges, and suffered casualties. By the time the horse arrived, they were desperate for any sign of victory, peace, or an end to the war. The Trojans believed that the Greeks had finally given up, as they were seen leaving in the distance, sailing away across the Aegean Sea. It's in this moment of hope and relief that the Trojan horse appeared. It was a grand and mysterious structure, massive, hollow, and intricate. The Greeks, according to the myth, had constructed it to honor the gods, particularly Athena, and left it as an offering to ensure a safe return home. The Trojans, weary from the long conflict and eager to believe the war was over, couldn't resist the temptation to bring the horse inside their city walls. The horse, after all, was a symbol of victory. It was large, seemingly impressive, and gifted by their longtime adversaries. What better way to celebrate their triumph than by welcoming the Greeks' final gesture? Historians still argue whether the Trojans would have truly been so naive. Some scholars believe the Trojans were likely too exhausted and desperate to question the legitimacy of the Greek gift. After a decade of relentless war, it's possible they simply couldn't fathom that the Greeks would leave behind such a formidable gift as a trick. Others argue that the Trojans should have known better. They had seen the Greeks' deception firsthand in the past, and their history of subterfuge was well known. Either way, the decision to bring the horse inside the city was the beginning of their end. Once the horse was inside the city walls, the Trojans celebrated. The gates of Troy were flung open, and the people poured out to admire the horse, marveling at its craftsmanship and glory. After years of bloodshed, they finally felt they had won. They held feasts and celebrations, believing that the gods had favored them and that the war had come to a close. They were unaware of the soldiers hidden inside the horse, waiting for the moment when they would spring into action. This moment is key because it illustrates the blindness of hope and the destructive power of misinterpretation. The Trojans, in their relief, failed to see the danger before them. They had been so beaten down by the war that they were ready to embrace peace at any cost. They mistook the horse as a gift, when in reality, it was a trap. The dramatic irony of the Trojan horse is that, while the Trojans believed they were receiving a token of peace, they were actually accepting the end of their city. It's a stark reminder of how our perceptions can be shaped by our desires. In the case of the Trojans, they wanted peace so badly that they overlooked the warning signs. They allowed their hope for an end to the conflict to blind them to the true intentions of the Greeks. Historians still argue over whether the Trojans truly thought the horse was a gift from the gods, or if they were simply too exhausted from war to think clearly. Some suggest the Trojans might have realized that the Greeks' departure was too good to be true but accepted the horse out of a sense of desperation. Either way, the horse's arrival marks the moment when the Trojans' fate was sealed, a fate that would unfold within hours. Now that the Trojan horse has been brought into the heart of the city, let's consider the moment of its acceptance, the Trojans' fateful decision to treat it as a gift. To us, looking back on the myth with modern sensibilities, it seems like an obvious mistake. How could anyone be so easily deceived? But let's try to imagine the Trojans' mindset after 10 long years of conflict. Exhausted, emotionally drained, and with their city on the brink of ruin, it's easy to see how they might have been lulled into a false sense of security. The horse, a seemingly monumental gift, represented not only the end of the siege but also the fulfillment of their dreams of peace. The Trojans were celebrating. They had witnessed the Greek ships sailing away into the distance, and the idea of a war that had dragged on for years finally coming to an end must have been overwhelmingly appealing. The Greek forces, in their eyes, were gone. Their city stood tall, and the gates of Troy were open once more. So, when the wooden horse arrived, being left behind by the Greeks as a supposed token of surrender, how could they not view it as a sign of victory? It's important to understand that, in ancient times, gifts were often laden with significance. A gift was more than just an offering, it was a form of communication, a way of expressing respect, alliance, or even submission. The Trojans likely interpreted the horse as a symbol of the Greeks' defeat and a gesture of goodwill. It seemed like the logical next step after such a long war. The Greeks had built the horse as a symbol of peace, and the Trojans, believing they had won, saw it as the perfect way to celebrate. The Greeks, of course, had a very different agenda. The horse wasn't a symbol of peace, it was a Trojan trick. But the Trojans were so overwhelmed by their desire to believe that the war was over that they didn't pause to consider the consequences of bringing the horse inside their city. And it wasn't just any ordinary gift, it was enormous. The Trojans couldn't help but marvel at the craftsmanship, and, perhaps to their own detriment, they assumed that such a monumental structure was too grand to be anything other than a peaceful offering. Historians still argue about whether the Trojans ever truly suspected the horse could be a trick. Some scholars believe they were too hopeful and exhausted to be cautious, while others suggest that the Trojans should have known better, given the history of deceit in the war. Whatever the case, the Trojans' decision to accept the horse was a pivotal moment that would lead directly to their downfall. The Greeks had played on their emotions, relief, exhaustion, and desperation, knowing that the Trojans would be too eager to embrace peace to look for any hidden dangers. What's fascinating is that the Trojans' acceptance of the horse highlights a recurring theme in mythology and history, the idea that people often overlook obvious threats when they are desperate for resolution. The Trojans were so eager to end the war that they allowed their judgment to be clouded. The horse, which symbolized their perceived victory, ultimately became the instrument of their defeat. It's a striking reminder that, when emotions run high, even the most intelligent people can make the most disastrous mistakes. The horse, once inside the city walls, was celebrated as a symbol of peace. The Trojans hosted a grand feast, their minds at ease, and their city seemingly saved from destruction. But as the night wore on and the revelry continued, the Greeks were already preparing to strike. Hidden inside the horse, their soldiers were waiting for the right moment to unleash chaos upon the unsuspecting Trojans. The gift that was supposed to mark the end of their suffering would instead become the catalyst for the city's destruction. As the Trojan horse was brought inside the city walls and the Trojans settled in to celebrate what they thought was the end of the war, the Greeks inside the horse lay still, waiting for the signal to emerge. The Trojans, caught up in their moment of triumph, feasted and reveled through the night, blissfully unaware that their victory was nothing but a fleeting illusion. The Greeks, hidden within the horse's hollow belly, were poised to strike when the time was right. They had used the Trojans' hope and exhaustion against them, waiting for the opportune moment to unleash devastation. Historians still argue about the details of that fateful night. Some suggest that the Greeks only emerged when the Trojans were deep in their drunken celebrations, letting their guard down. Others believe that it was more of a calculated surprise, a precise strike that caught the Trojans completely off guard. Regardless of the exact timing, the key point is that the Trojans, in their joy and relief, never considered the possibility of betrayal. They had trusted that their war with the Greeks was over, and in doing so, they forgot the lessons of deception and strategy that had been part of the war from the very beginning. The moment the Greeks inside the horse finally emerged, it was like a flash of lightning, the darkness of night suddenly pierced by the deadly light of war. The soldiers, led by Odysseus and other Greek leaders, poured out from their hiding place, rushing into the city. They opened the gates for the rest of the Greek army, who had returned under the cover of night, ready to strike when the Trojans were at their weakest. The Trojans, still in the throes of celebration, were thrown into disarray. It's said that they initially thought the Greeks were returning to claim the horse as part of their victory procession. But when the Greeks burst from the horse, attacking from all sides, the truth was unmistakable. The city of Troy was not saved, it was doomed. Historians still debate how long the Greeks waited inside the horse before making their move. Was it a matter of hours, or was it the entire night? Some suggest that the Greeks may have spent a long, tense period hidden in the horse, waiting for the Trojans to fall asleep or grow comfortable enough to lower their defenses. The sheer patience required to wait for such an opening shows the Greek resolve and tactical discipline. Odysseus, known for his cunning and intelligence, must have relished the moment, the culmination of his long, drawn-out plan coming to fruition. The Trojans' overconfidence was their fatal flaw. They had been duped by their own desire for an end to the war, and as a result, they failed to see the danger lurking just outside their gates. It's a reminder that, in war, the cost of victory is often higher than we expect. The Greeks had sacrificed 10 years of effort and countless lives to get to this point, and in the end, it was the cleverness of their strategy, not brute force, that secured their triumph. As the Greeks flooded into the city, chaos erupted. The once proud walls of Troy, which had withstood so much, were no match for the sudden onslaught. The Trojans, unprepared for such an attack, were quickly overwhelmed. As the city burned, the Greek forces began their final push to complete their conquest, securing their victory and marking the end of the Trojan War. The Night of the Trojan Horse is one of the most dramatic moments in all of Greek mythology, a tale of surprise, deceit, and the devastating consequences of overestimating one's own security. The Trojans thought they had won. They thought the war was over. But they learned, too late, that in the world of warfare, nothing is ever truly certain. After the Greeks emerged from the Trojan Horse and opened the gates to their hidden forces, the fate of Troy was sealed. The once imposing walls that had withstood a decade of siege now became mere obstacles for the Greek soldiers, who were determined to exact their revenge and end the war once and for all. The night that followed was one of chaos, panic, and destruction, as the Trojans, unprepared for such a sudden attack, were overwhelmed by the Greeks. Imagine the panic in Troy as the Greeks flooded through the city's gates. The sounds of clashing swords and desperate cries filled the streets as the Trojans realized, too late, the true cost of their overconfidence. Their city, which had once stood as a symbol of power and strength, was now being torn apart by the very enemies they had thought they had defeated. Families were torn apart, heroes and leaders fell, and the once proud warriors of Troy were left to either flee or face a brutal end. Hector, the Trojan prince and greatest warrior, had already fallen during the earlier stages of the war, and his death was a great blow to Troy's morale. Now, with the city in flames, the Trojans were left without their best defenses. King Priam, once a proud ruler, watched helplessly as his kingdom crumbled around him. In some versions of the myth, Priam is killed by the Greek hero Achilles' son, Neoptolemus, in a particularly tragic scene that underscores the destruction and loss the Trojans endured. Historians still argue about how much of this destruction was a result of the Greeks' clever trickery versus sheer force. Some believe that the Greeks were simply looking for any opportunity to enter the city and, once inside, they had the advantage of overwhelming the Trojans with their numbers and superior military tactics. Others suggest that the fall of Troy was inevitable after so many years of siege and war. Perhaps the city's defenses had weakened, and the Trojans had simply run out of resources, morale, and hope. Regardless of the exact causes, the fall of Troy marked the end of an era. The city, which had once been the jewel of the ancient world, was now nothing more than a smoldering ruin. Its citizens were either slaughtered or taken as prisoners, and its treasures looted. The Greeks, victorious in their mission, returned home, but not without the heavy toll that war takes on any civilization. For the Trojans, there would be no happy ending, only destruction, loss, and the bitter realization that their greatest mistake had been allowing the Greeks to slip past their defenses under the guise of peace. The fall of Troy became a defining moment in Greek mythology, and it also marked the end of the Trojan War. After the Greeks took control of the city, they left behind a legacy of conquest and deception that would be remembered for generations. In later stories, the Trojan horse became a symbol not just of Greek cunning but also of the fragility of human pride and the dangers of underestimating an enemy. It's a tale of how the Greeks used their brains, not just their brawn, to achieve victory. And it's a lesson about how the mightiest of cities can fall when their inhabitants are blinded by hope, pride, or overconfidence. Now that the Trojans have fallen, the tale of the Trojan horse itself has been passed down through generations, and its impact on history has endured. But let's pause and reflect on one thing that has continued to linger: how much of the story we know today is fact, and how much is a product of myth-making. Historians have long debated the historical accuracy of the Trojan horse, and whether it was truly a clever piece of military strategy or just an embellished legend designed to explain the fall of Troy. The crux of the debate lies in the lack of concrete evidence. While we have numerous literary sources that describe the Trojan horse, including the Aeneid by Virgil and Homer's Odyssey, these sources are works of myth, not historical documents. As a result, the historical truth of the Trojan horse remains elusive. The horse itself is never mentioned in contemporary texts from the time of the Trojan War, which means we have to rely on later interpretations and retellings to piece together the story. Was the horse a real wooden structure, or was it simply a metaphorical device to convey the idea of trickery and deception? Some historians suggest that the story of the Trojan horse might have had roots in real military tactics. The concept of hiding soldiers in a large object or structure to infiltrate enemy lines is not entirely out of the realm of possibility. There have been instances throughout history where siege weapons or deceptive tactics were used to breach city walls. The Greek general Odysseus, known for his cunning and craftiness, might have developed this strategy based on real military knowledge of how to exploit weaknesses. The idea of hiding soldiers within a seemingly harmless object could have been a tactic used during the war but later mythologized to enhance the narrative. Others argue that the story of the Trojan horse is purely symbolic, created long after the events to explain how Troy fell. They suggest that the Greeks, in their quest to explain their ultimate victory, might have fabricated the horse to serve as a metaphor for the kind of cleverness and trickery that was central to their culture. The horse could have represented the Greeks' ability to outsmart their enemies, rather than a literal object used to infiltrate Troy. Over time, as myths were retold and adapted, the image of the horse became a central element of the story, reinforcing the idea that intelligence and strategy were the true keys to victory, not just brute force. Historians still argue whether the Trojan horse was truly a literal object used by the Greeks or whether it was a symbolic representation of the Greek strategic ingenuity. Was it an actual siege weapon or merely a story meant to highlight the tactical brilliance of the Greeks? Some scholars even question the entire Trojan War's historicity, suggesting that the entire saga might have been exaggerated or invented as part of the larger Greek mythological tradition. Regardless of the historical truth, what we can agree on is the profound impact the Trojan horse has had on literature and culture. The myth of the horse and its cunning strategy has become a timeless symbol of deception, intelligence, and the dangers of letting down one's guard. In modern times, it's still used to describe any situation where something that appears harmless turns out to be a clever trap or trick, just like the Trojan horse itself. Despite the uncertainty surrounding its historical accuracy, the Trojan horse has transcended its mythological origins to become one of the most enduring symbols in modern culture. From literature to movies, from business strategies to political metaphors, the Trojan horse has found a way to resonate with people across time and space. The story's legacy continues to shape how we think about strategy, deception, and the consequences of misplaced trust, making the Trojan horse not just a relic of ancient Greece but a timeless emblem of human behavior. In literature, the Trojan horse has remained a powerful symbol of the triumph of wit over strength. Writers and poets continue to draw on the horse's imagery to explore themes of cleverness, betrayal, and the unexpected consequences of seemingly harmless actions. It's not just an ancient Greek story, it's a tale that speaks to universal human themes. Authors and storytellers often use the Trojan horse to represent hidden dangers or to highlight the danger of underestimating the enemy. The phrase, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts," which originates from the story of the horse, has become a popular saying, cautioning against accepting gifts or promises without considering the potential risks. The Trojan horse also appears in countless modern movies, often in the form of elaborate plots or deceptive tricks. Its most famous appearance may be in the 2004 film Troy, where the horse is presented as a literal part of the Greek strategy to breach Troy's walls. The film, though highly dramatized and somewhat inaccurate in its details, captures the core idea of the Trojan horse: cleverness, deceit, and the moment when the enemy realizes they've been outwitted. But even outside historical dramas, the Trojan horse serves as a metaphor for trickery and deception in films and books of all genres, often playing a pivotal role in plot twists and unexpected betrayals. In the business world, the Trojan horse has become a popular metaphor for strategies that involve subterfuge or the gradual infiltration of an enemy's defenses. A business tactic that initially appears harmless, like a generous offer or a friendly gesture, might actually be a clever way of gaining access to a competitor's weaknesses. Entrepreneurs and leaders use the Trojan horse metaphor to describe strategies that involve sneaking in under the radar and later using that foothold to gain an advantage. Politically, the Trojan horse metaphor has been invoked to describe covert operations, espionage, or acts of subversion. The idea of a seemingly innocent gift being used to carry out a hidden agenda has been applied to situations involving political manipulation, foreign influence, or covert military action. From the Cold War to modern cybersecurity tactics, the Trojan horse continues to symbolize how appearances can deceive, and how even the most benign-seeming action can conceal a much darker motive. Historians still debate how the Trojan horse's symbolism has shifted over the centuries. Is it primarily a story about military strategy, or is it more about human nature, our susceptibility to manipulation, our belief in the kindness of our enemies, and our tendency to underestimate what lies before us? Some argue that the Trojan horse myth has evolved from a military tool to a broader philosophical lesson, one that speaks to the dangers of complacency and the perils of false trust. As the Trojan horse continues to appear in contemporary media, literature, and even political discourse, it serves as a reminder of the lasting power of myth. It's not just a story about ancient warfare, it's a cautionary tale about how easily even the mightiest can be brought low by a simple trick. The Trojan horse lives on as a metaphor for deception, strategy, and the consequences of lowering one's guard in the face of an apparent peace. As we continue our exploration of the Trojan horse, we must dive into its deeper significance as a metaphor. Over the years, the Trojan horse has evolved beyond a literal wooden structure into a powerful symbol of deception, hidden threats, and the consequences of placing too much trust in something that seems too good to be true. The story of the Trojan horse has permeated countless aspects of our modern world, from our political systems to our daily lives, where it serves as a reminder of how appearances can often mask danger. At its core, the Trojan horse is a symbol of trickery. It represents the idea that something seemingly benign, even a gift, can be used as a tool of deception. In the myth, the Greeks hid inside the horse, and what seemed like a peace offering was, in reality, a deadly weapon. This idea of deception, of something concealed within a seemingly harmless exterior, continues to resonate today, especially when we think about the ways in which we are all susceptible to manipulation. Whether it's in the form of corporate marketing, political promises, or even personal relationships, the Trojan horse reminds us that not everything is as it seems. Moreover, the Trojan horse is a metaphor for how people often fail to recognize the true nature of something until it's too late. The Trojans, eager for an end to their suffering, accepted the horse without questioning its real purpose. Their desperation for peace made them overlook the possibility of a hidden threat. This is a theme that resonates in many areas of life, whether it's in business decisions, international relations, or personal interactions. We often let our guard down, believing that our enemies or competitors have finally shown kindness, only to be blindsided by their hidden motives. The Trojan horse teaches us that when we're desperate for peace or closure, we may inadvertently open the door to our own undoing. The horse also serves as a metaphor for the dangers of overconfidence. After years of war, the Trojans believed they had won, they had pushed the Greeks away, and they thought they could now let their guard down. The Greeks, on the other hand, understood that it wasn't brute strength that would win the war, but strategy and subterfuge. The Trojans' overconfidence in their victory, coupled with their desire for peace, blinded them to the true nature of the Greeks' final move. It's a reminder that in any situation, whether it's a business deal or a political negotiation, success should not breed complacency. Overconfidence can make us vulnerable to attacks that we never saw coming. Furthermore, the Trojan horse can also be seen as a symbol of the balance between external and internal forces. On the outside, it appears to be a peaceful gift, but inside, it harbors destructive intent. This duality, the contrast between appearance and reality, is central to the human experience. The Trojan horse serves as a reminder that what appears outwardly harmless can often harbor the most dangerous consequences. In modern life, this can be seen in situations where trust is betrayed, where the promise of something good masks the true destructive potential of a hidden agenda. In literature, the Trojan horse has been used as a metaphor to explore the theme of unexpected consequences. Writers and thinkers have long used the image of the horse to suggest that even our best-laid plans can sometimes lead to outcomes we didn't anticipate. The Trojans thought they were accepting a gift, but what they didn't see was the hidden army inside, waiting to strike. This speaks to the uncertainty of life itself. Our actions, even those we think are well-intentioned, can have far-reaching consequences. The Trojan horse teaches us to always consider the unknown factors in any situation and not to take things at face value. Historians still argue about how much the Trojan horse was intended as a symbol or if it was merely a military tactic. Some believe it was purely a Greek literary device, added later to the story to symbolize cleverness and triumph. Others argue that the idea of the Trojan horse was based on real military strategies, with the horse being a physical manifestation of the clever strategies employed by the Greeks. Whether the horse was real or symbolic, what's clear is that its power as a metaphor has only grown over time. The myth of the Trojan horse continues to be relevant because it speaks to the fundamental truths of human nature, our vulnerability to deception, our tendency to ignore warning signs when we're desperate, and our capacity to misjudge situations based on our desires. The horse remains an enduring metaphor for the dangers of trusting something that appears too good to be true, and for the unexpected consequences of letting our guard down. As we wrap up our journey through the myth of the Trojan horse, it's impossible not to reflect on the enduring legacy of this story. Over thousands of years, this tale has evolved from an ancient Greek war strategy into a powerful metaphor that continues to resonate across cultures and time periods. The Trojan horse, in all its deceptive simplicity, has stood the test of time, reminding us of the human tendency to fall for something that seems too good to be true, and the devastating consequences that often follow. The Trojan horse has left an indelible mark on history, literature, and even modern society. From books to films to political discourse, the story of the horse has been used time and again as a symbol of deception, strategy, and the vulnerability that comes with letting our guard down. It's hard to think of a more fitting metaphor for the dangers of trust, especially when that trust is placed in something or someone that appears harmless, benevolent, or even generous. Whether it's a corporate deal gone wrong, a political agreement that leads to betrayal, or even personal relationships, the Trojan horse serves as a cautionary tale that we continue to learn from. In a world where information is constantly changing and new challenges arise every day, the Trojan horse still reminds us of the importance of vigilance. While technology and warfare have evolved, the fundamental lessons of the Trojan horse remain timeless. It speaks to the dangers of underestimating an enemy or a situation simply because it appears to be benign or even beneficial. It teaches us to be aware of hidden motives, to question our assumptions, and to recognize that things are not always as they seem. Moreover, the Trojan horse reminds us of the power of stories themselves. Myths like this one were never just about recounting historical events. They were lessons, tools to teach and warn future generations. The Greeks and Trojans, through their actions, unknowingly created a narrative that would resonate throughout history. It's fascinating to think that a trick, a clever piece of strategy, could become a part of the shared human experience, providing insight into human nature, war, and the consequences of deceit. The Trojan horse's legacy also speaks to the value of strategic thinking, something that transcends time and culture. The Greeks, through the mind of Odysseus and others, understood that strength alone would not secure victory. It was the careful use of intellect and deception that led to their success. The horse, then, is more than just a story of trickery, it's a testament to the importance of ingenuity in warfare, diplomacy, and even everyday life. As the myth has evolved, so too has our interpretation of it. We might not use wooden horses to invade cities, but the lessons of the Trojan horse still apply in our world. In fact, the image of the Trojan horse has become a part of our collective consciousness, symbolizing not just military strategy, but also the concept of hidden dangers lying beneath the surface of what seems safe or harmless. And so, as we reflect on the story of the Trojan horse, we see that it's more than just a war story from ancient Greece. It's a timeless reminder of the complexity of trust, the dangers of complacency, and the unexpected ways that intelligence, strategy, and even deception can shape the course of history. The horse, in all its glory and treachery, will continue to capture our imaginations and teach us lessons about the fine line between victory and downfall.